Long ago, before the Yorubas all made peace, at the outskirts of the great village of Oye, Osayemi lived with her family in a small hut near the banks of the Akogba River. Most evenings, laughter would ring out from their hut and echo through the forest as her father told her wild stories of his negotiations with the animals to secure their dinner, while her mother roasted his catch across the open fire. He would tell her it was her bright and lovely smile that the sun came out to look at every morning, and her laughter watered all the plants to make it grow. Her mother would nod in agreement as she served their food or beaded Usayemi's hair. Apart from the occasional stopovers from other hunters or tired travelers, they lived a quiet and peaceful life. Unfortunately, the happiness in Osayemi's life did not last for long. Her mother died during childbirth when she was 14 years old, and even worse, 6 months later, her grieving father simply never returned from a hunt. Osayemi now lived alone from fruits and vegetables off their small farm, wild berries, and small games like rabbits as she waited anxiously for her father's return. Sometimes she would comb through the forest to search for him. This lasted for 18 months. On the day she turned 16, her life eventually changed forever. It began like any other day, except the forest itself was quiet and filled with the strange sound of a dozen hooves and loud barks from domestic dogs. Osayemi thought it was a huge caravan of travelers passing by, but it was the entourage of the King of Oye, Oba Adelabi and his chiefs who were passing through the length and breadth of his kingdom. The king was shocked to see a young maiden living alone in such remote corridors of his kingdom. Osayemi told the king her mother had died and she was waiting for her father to return from his hunt. When the king asked her how long her father had been away for, she sadly told him it was nearing 2 years now, but she was sure he would return any day. Since Osayemi insisted she would wait for her father, the king calmly told her her father must have been killed by a wild animal or he would have returned home to her. But she told him her father could talk to the animals, so she was sure they could not have killed him. The king eyed her suspiciously, but then convinced Osayemi that she could not remain in the forest alone. He asked her to follow him to his kingdom, where she would live with him as his own daughter till her father returned. What won her over was his promise to send some of his best hunters to search for him all through the forest and ask around his kingdom for more information. As they headed to his palace, Oba Adegboye pondered on her ridiculous claims and beliefs, just hoping his new daughter had not been driven to madness by isolation. In the palace, the queen, Oloigbemisola, was worried immediately she saw Osayemi. This was because only 3 days ago, the diviner's servant had told her to give up on her desire to give birth to a male heir, and that the king's mother would soon come into the kingdom. She had dismissed the words as that of a child unsteady in the art of divining, since her husband was the king and his mother was already dead. But now, the presence of Osayemi troubled her. Did it mean Osayemi would give the king a son and become the Yaoba? Glory herself had only one daughter, whom she treasured above everything, but was hoping for a son. She immediately told the king that the forest child was not welcome in the palace, and they had to send her away before she brought bad luck to them. Oba Adegboye laughed and eventually told how Osayemi was their answered prayer. He had been seeking an alliance with the fearsome king of Okeagba Kingdom, Oba Oriogun, and had surveyed his own lands to decide what part to give to him as an alliance gift. But now that Osayemi, a beautiful and bountiful maiden, was his daughter, he did not need to part with anything at all. After all, apart from being a fearsome and powerful king, Oba Oriogun was famous for his love for beautiful princesses, which he liked to add to his harem of women. Naomi enjoyed some months of peace under the watchful gaze of Oloigbemisola. Unknown to her, her fate was about to change. Oba Adeboye successfully arranged her marriage to Oba Oriogun, after which he approached Osayemi, pretending to be seriously troubled. Concerned, Osayemi asked him what was troubling him. He told her he'd verified the news that Oba Oriogun was coming to attack his kingdom, and he loved his people so much he could not let them live under such a tyrant. He had to mobilize his men to prepare for war and recall the men searching for her father. How would they find her father in the midst of a war? 2 days later, he again told Osayemi that Oba Oriogun would not attack them if he gave him his daughter's hand in marriage, but he had already promised his daughter Adejoke to another king, who would also wage war against him if he broke that promise. He did not know how to avoid the war, except Osayemi was willing to marry Oba Oriogun. He told her everyone knew Oba Oriogun was good to his wives. Trusting the kindness the devious king had shown her and to ensure the continued search for her father, Osayemi married Oba Oriogun and joined his harem. Her life of comfort in Okeagba was short-lived because soon after consummating their marriage, she fell out of favour when Oba Oriogun discovered her lack of royal blood. Even though Obadegboye insisted his adopted daughter had the same rank as his biological daughter, it was his own pride and honour that prevented Oba Oriogun from returning her to her so-called father, so he still fulfilled his covenant of peace with Oye. When the primary queen, Olori Folashade, saw that her husband for some reason was no longer interested in his beautiful new wife, she jealously moved her to the hut furthest from the king within the palace. The palace wardens were also mean to Osayemi and did not give her the customary share of the monthly upkeep meant for every Olori. He was forced to survive on the kindness of some of the other Oloris who took pity on her. But Osayemi, who was used to living a simple rural life, did not care. She even wished she could live to search for her father since she never heard from Oba Adegboye after she left his kingdom. But she could not. The prestige of being an Olori, together with Oba Oriogun's pride, shackled her to the palace. Yes, she enjoyed very little of the perks. When the king was told Osayemi was pregnant, he did not think much of it. He already had sons and daughters. He could not find the time to name or see her children. So Osayemi named her son Olujimi and her daughter Arike. With their birth, her priorities shifted from finding her father to raising her children. For a short while, Olujimi and Arike learned and played with their other siblings, but as they began to bully him, he abandoned them and took his sister with him. While Arike had her mother's gentle nature and quiet spirit, Olujimi was nothing like his mother. He was daring and strong and would beat up anyone who tried to bully him, his mother, or his sister. At 9 years old, he removed 2 teeth from the chief's warden's mouth for refusing to give them their allowance, and at 11, he broke his third brother's arm for throwing dirty water on his mother, so he had to find friends outside the palace. For a while, he joined the company of the butchers, separating flesh and bone like he was born for it. Then the farmers, and none of his age grade reaped a better harvest. He beat steel better than the blacksmith's children. He was so diligent in his tasks, everyone forgot he was a prince. He eventually settled in well among the hunters because they were rarely in the village and he liked the freedom of the forests. The hunters loved Olujimi. His expeditions were the most successful, and he generously shared his catch with them. He would tell them he could hear the animals, and so he would negotiate to only go home with the old or wicked ones. The other hunters would laugh and tell him he must genuinely share his hunting tricks with them. When he became commander of all the hunters, his mother and sister were proud of him, but they did not like that he was mostly away from home, and his mother feared he would suffer the same fate as her father. Years passed and Osayemi's husband, Oba Oriogun, died from sickness. His first son and the heir apparent, Adelabi, became king, but he did not have the reputation of his father. In fact, other kings believed the new king was young, weak, and inexperienced, so they tried to tear out chunks of his kingdom from under him. His most formidable contender was Oba Goriade, the unscrupulous and ambitious king of Akeru land. To fan the embers of war, Oba Goriade quietly instructed his war general to send disguised warriors to farm into the borders of Okeagba and start fights with their farmers. The new king, Oba Adelabi, swiftly sent messengers to Oba Goriade, asking him to caution his people and to halt their incursion into Okeagba kingdom. Oba Goriade pretended to be shocked by the news and proposed a royal marriage to quell the tensions between their people. The young king was not a fool. He saw through Goriade's plan to start a war to condemn them to tribute with his impossible request. Everybody knew all the princesses of Okeagba were married already. Still, he had to proceed with caution. Upon the death of his father, Oye had broken ties with Okeagba after relying on their strength for decades to expand their borders. They had instead formed an alliance with Akeru Kingdom, so victory would be very hard to secure because he would be fighting a battle on two fronts. Just as he was pondering on what to do, he remembered Oye's princess, Osayemi. She had a forgotten daughter, Arike. To buy time for his warriors to prepare for war, he immediately ordered his guards to fetch Arike for marriage. When Osayemi heard the king's decree, she cried till her voice was hoarse, but Oba Adelabi was firm in his decision. The guards snatched up Arike, gave her to the maids to prepare her for hasty marriage rites, and delivered her to Akeru messengers to take her to their king. News of his sister's hasty and unceremonious marriage soon got to Olujimi, who was on a hunting expedition with some hunters. He was filled with anger. The royal palace that had ignored his family for so long had just married off his sister for their convenience to an old and vicious king. He resolved to rescue his sister and take her and his mother away from the kingdom. They would move further north to live in unclaimed forest, like his mother said she did with her parents. The other hunters resolved to join him and they began their long journey back to the village. In Akeru Kingdom, Arike's arrival drove Oba Goriade into a state of fury because his plans did not materialize, so he immediately ordered her to be thrown into the dungeon. He and Obadegboye of Oye, who had already agreed to share the kingdom of Okeagba between themselves, decided to kill Arike with the excuse that she did not have pure royal blood. Her father may have been the great king of Okeagba, but Oba Adeboye revealed to everybody that her mother, his adopted daughter, was a forest child he had taken in out of the kindness of his heart, and that the king of Akeru land did not deserve an inferior princess. Immediately, they both attacked Okeagba kingdom. The people of Okeagba were taken by surprise as they thought they had successfully pacified Oba Akeru for a while. Even though Okeagba warriors fought fiercely and bravely, they were overwhelmed by the combined forces of Akeru and Oye. Unfortunately, Oba Adelabi and four of his brothers fell during the battle. This forced the rest of the warriors to flee. The villagers hid between rocks and bushes as the invading soldiers began to capture people to take them to Akeru to build walls and new palaces. By the time Olujimi arrived with the hunters, he met a ransacked village of wounded warriors and had to check some hidden spots to find frightened villagers. They told him about the devastating death of the king and some princes. The remaining members of the royal family had fled, and the warriors of Oye and Akeru would probably return at any time to capture all the remaining villagers, force them to work for the expansion of Akeru and Oye land. They begged Olujimi and the other hunters to take them far away into the forest where they could begin another settlement. Olujimi, who was going to leave Okeagba with his sister and mother, suddenly had a change of heart. "We must fight for our land," Olujimi said. "Fight? How?" Laniyan, the head of the blacksmith, asked. "Our warriors are injured, our king is dead, and all our princes have run away." As those words poured out of his mouth, he looked at Olujimi again and suddenly remembered his royal heritage. It was so easy to forget Olujimi was also a prince of the land. He never wore any beads or moved around with royal guards. It was possible even Olujimi had forgotten he was a prince. "You are standing before a prince at this very moment," Olujimi said. Olujimi reminded the blacksmiths that their hand had spent years beating iron and steel, and so they had the strength to beat any warrior. He immediately gathered the remaining villagers. dividing them along their crafts. The farmers, weavers, blacksmiths, carvers, everybody. The weavers would weave dry grass, which they would spread across deep holes dug by farmers, in which they would place sharp spikes made by the carvers, and he would pull out the ace that had made him catch big animals during the hunt. Back in Akeru, Arike, who was in the dungeon and waiting to be killed, was under the custody of the dungeon keeper, a kind old man who brought her food daily and encouraged her to be strong. He told her mother would come for her and that she would only have happy days from now on. But Arike knew the king had already ordered her death, so she did not have any hope, although she was grateful for the kindness of the dungeon keeper in her final days. What she did not know was that the dungeon keeper had lied to the king that she had already been killed and her body was dumped in the bush for vultures. On the day the warriors of Akeru and Oye came to Okeagba to capture more villagers and divide up the kingdom, Okeagba returned their surprise. Healing and brave warriors, together with the blacksmiths and other villagers, put up a fierce resistance to defend their land from the invaders. Despite their reduced numbers, they fought with all their might for their land and family. Just as they began to get tired, growls and strange noises filled the air. Hundreds of lions, tigers, and hyenas burst out from the forest, led by Olujimi, and attacked the warriors of Oye and Akeru. King Adegboye was the first to flee, but he was eventually captured as the Okeagba people and the animals chased the invaders down to Akeru. Oba Goriade was devoured by a hyena. The captured and wounded Oba Adelabi shamefully surrendered, and the people were relieved to be victorious. The hunters were shocked to discover that Olujimi was not joking about his claim of talking to animals. The villagers brought their people out of Akeru dungeons and were so excited to see Arike alive and well. She quickly told them the dungeon keeper was on their side and they had to spare his life. As Olujimi and his mother went to thank the dungeon keeper who spared Arike's life, Osayemi nearly fainted. It was her father. He embraced her as they both shed tears of joy. Then he explained what had happened all those years ago. He had run into a strange group of men, killing many elephants for their tusks. When he tried to stop them, they overpowered him and nearly beat his life out of him. He was saved by a diviner, but he was bedridden for 2 years. After returning to their hut, he did not find her there. The diviner had told him to go and wait for his daughter at Akeru dungeons, so he had waited there all these years. Immediately he saw Arike, he could tell she was his granddaughter and would lead his daughter to him. It was a day of happiness for the family. Finally, Olujimi, now the rightful ruler of Okeagba, annexed the kingdoms of Akeru and Oye. He promptly installed his mother as the Yoruba, and she offered him wise counsel as the king's mother. He ruled as the king of the unified kingdom of Okeagba Oye Akeru, as the renamed King Obarinwa Obameta the First. He was a wise and benevolent ruler, so the unified kingdom was very prosperous with loyal and happy villagers for a long, long time. And this is the end of our story.